Sign or get out, my husband mocked, waving papers in the house I fully paid for. He smirked as if throwing me out would break me. I signed, placed the keys on the table and walked away. The next morning, his elite lawyer screamed at him, "Do you have any idea what you just let her do? We need to talk about the house." Blake's voice cut through the darkness at 7 a.m., and I found him sitting in my home office chair, fully dressed, briefcase at his feet. He'd arranged my own financial documents across the desk. Bank statements, mortgage papers, the deed, like evidence in a courtroom. "I've done some calculations," he continued, pulling out a fresh legal pad covered in numbers. "It's time we discuss who really owns what in this marriage." The briefcase was new. Brown leather, combination locks, the kind carried by men who wanted to look important in meetings they'd never attend. Blake had positioned himself behind my desk like he belonged there, in the office where I'd built Cassidy Blackwood Consulting from nothing into a 7-figure enterprise. The morning light from the window highlighted dust motes floating between us, and I noticed he'd moved my achievement awards to make room for his legal pad. "You went through my filing cabinet." Not a question. The locked cabinet where I kept original documents, contracts worth millions, sensitive client information that required NDAs just to discuss. "Our filing cabinet," Blake corrected, tapping his pencil against the legal pad. "Marriage is a partnership, Cassidy. 50-50. That's what my attorney says." His attorney. The words hung between us while I studied the man I'd married 4 years ago. Blake wore the charcoal suit I'd bought him last year for a job interview he'd cancelled at the last minute, claiming the company wasn't prestigious enough for his vision. His hair was styled with the expensive pomade from my bathroom drawer. Even his posture was different. Straighter, practiced, like he'd been rehearsing this scene in the mirror. I walked closer, noting how he'd arranged my documents in neat piles. The mortgage statements showing every payment I'd made before and during our marriage. The property tax records in my name alone. The deed dated 2 years before Blake and I had our first date, purchased with inheritance money from my grandmother who'd worked 3 jobs to save every penny. "Your attorney," I repeated, picking up the Harrison Industries contract from the corner of my desk where he'd pushed it aside. This single deal had generated more revenue than Blake had earned in his entire life. The same Blake who called lawyers parasites last month when I hired Rachel to review our expansion documents? He shifted in my chair. My custom ergonomic chair that cost more than his monthly gym membership. That was different. "This is about protecting our interests." "Our interests." I set down the contract and picked up his legal pad. His handwriting looked like a child's attempt at cursive, all loops and uncertainty. He'd written marital assets at the top and listed everything I owned, including items from before our marriage. My grandmother's jewelry. The Vermont cabin my father left me. The original paintings I'd bought to celebrate closing my first $1 million deal. Blake stood up, moving around the desk to face me directly. "I've contributed to this marriage, Cassidy. While you were building your business, I maintained our home. I supported your career. Maintained our home. I thought about the contractors I'd hired to fix the roof leak Blake never noticed. The landscaping service I paid for because Blake's idea of yard work was hiring neighborhood kids who never showed up. The cleaning service that came twice a week while Blake was at extended lunches with his business partners who never seemed to have actual businesses." "Is that what you told your attorney?" I asked, noticing a Garrett and Associates business card pecking out from under the mortgage papers. "That you maintained our home while I worked?" "I've made sacrifices," Blake said, his voice rising slightly. "I put my career on hold for this marriage. The career that never existed. The consulting firm that never had clients. The app development company that never developed apps. The investment advisory service that never advised anyone because Blake didn't have the required licenses and showed no interest in obtaining them." I moved to the window, looking out at the garden I'd designed and paid for, where I'd planted roses from my grandmother's house after she died. The house she'd left me enough money to buy this place, back when Blake was still living in his brother's basement, talking about potential and opportunity while playing video games until dawn. "The house is mine, Blake," I said quietly, watching Mr. Patterson walk his beagle past our driveway, my driveway. "It was mine before we met. The deed is in my name alone. I've paid every mortgage payment, every repair, every improvement." "We're married," Blake said as if those 2 words erased years of financial records. "The law says." The law says premarital assets remain separate property unless commingled. I turned to face him. I've been very careful not to commingle. Blake's face reddened. He grabbed a stack of bank statements, waving them at me. These show joint account transfers. You put money in our shared account every month. For household expenses, groceries, utilities, your personal spending. All documented, all separate from the mortgage and property taxes I pay from my business account. He slammed the papers down, his practiced composure cracking. I deserve something for these 4 years. You can't just. Can't what, Blake? I picked up the deed, holding it up to the light. Can't own what I bought with my inheritance? Can't keep what I've paid for every month while you were at the gym, at lunch, at networking events that never networked anything? Blake grabbed his briefcase, fumbling with the combination locks he'd probably set yesterday. This isn't over. Thomas Garrett is one of the best divorce attorneys in the state. Thomas Garrett advertises on bus benches, I said, remembering the garish yellow signs I'd seen downtown. He was suspended from practice twice for ethics violations. Blake's face went pale. How do you? I run a consulting firm, Blake. I do research. It's what successful businesses require. I gathered my documents from the desk, sorting them back into their proper order. Something you'd know if any of your ventures had progressed beyond PowerPoint presentations. He stood there, briefcase clutched against his chest like armor, the morning light making him look younger, more like the charming man I'd met at that conference 4 years ago. The one who'd talked about dreams and ambition, who'd made me believe partnership meant something more than financial contribution. We'll see what happens when the papers are filed, Blake said, moving toward the door. You might be surprised what a good attorney can do. I sat down in my chair, still warm from his presence, and pulled up my email. 3 new client inquiries, a contract renewal from Morrison Group, and a message from Rachel Thornton marked, urgent, read immediately. My attorney, who actually was one of the best in the state, had been expecting this day for months. Blake, I called as he reached the doorway. He turned, hope flickering across his features. The locks will be changed by the time you get home tonight. The locks wouldn't be changed for another 6 hours, but I had more immediate problems. Emma knocked on my office door 20 minutes after Blake left, carrying the monthly financial statements I typically reviewed myself. Her expression made my stomach drop before she even spoke. I wasn't sure if I should bring these directly to you, Emma said, setting the folder on my desk with unusual hesitation. She'd been with me for 3 years, hired straight from business school, and had never looked this uncomfortable. Blake picked them up from accounting yesterday, said he was helping with the monthly review. I opened the folder, scanning the credit card statements first. Everything looked standard until I reached the 3rd page. There it was, buried between a lunch meeting and office supplies. Garrett and Associates $2,500 retainer fee, dated 3 weeks ago. The same day Blake had surprised me with flowers and dinner at my favorite restaurant, claiming he wanted to celebrate my latest contract win. Emma, I said, keeping my voice steady despite the anger building in my chest. Did Blake say anything when he picked these up? She shifted her weight, uncomfortable. He mentioned something about understanding the business better. Said he wanted to be more involved in your success. She paused, then added quietly. He also asked if I knew how corporate assets were handled in partnerships. I assumed he meant business partnerships. Of course he did. Blake, who couldn't balance his own checking account, suddenly developing an interest in corporate asset division. I flipped through more pages, finding 2 additional consultations charged to our joint account. One with a real estate assessor. Another with someone called Bradley Kingston, whose LinkedIn profile I quickly pulled up revealed him to be a business valuator specializing in privately held companies. My phone rang at exactly 12:30 p.m. Blake's name on the screen was accompanied by a photo from our wedding day, both of us smiling at something off camera. I remembered that moment. My cousin had been making faces, trying to get us to laugh naturally for the photographer. We looked happy, young, unaware that one of us was capable of this kind of calculated betrayal. Hi, sweetheart. Blake's voice carried a strange energy, like he was reading from cue cards. What time will you be home tonight? I'm planning something special for dinner. Blake didn't cook. In 4 years of marriage, his culinary achievements included burnt toast and occasionally successfully reheating takeout. Something special? We need to talk about our future, he said, and I could hear paper rustling in the background. About making some changes that will benefit both of us. The words sounded rehearsed, probably practiced in front of the bathroom mirror this morning after I'd left. I pictured him standing there, gesturing at his reflection, trying different inflections until he found one that sounded authoritative instead of desperate. "I'll be home by 7, I lied, already mentally rearranging my schedule. "Should I pick up wine?" "No, I've got everything handled." Another first. Blake handling anything beyond his gym schedule was notable. "Just bring yourself." After he hung up, I sat in my office feeling the weight of what was coming. The man who needed detailed instructions to operate our coffee maker was orchestrating something he thought was clever. The same person who'd forgotten our anniversary twice was suddenly detail-oriented enough to hire lawyers and valuators without my knowledge. My phone rang again. This time it was my mother, her Florida number bringing a different kind of dread. Mom never called during business hours unless something was wrong. "Cassidy, honey, I'm confused about something," she began without preamble. "Blake called this morning asking about your father's Vermont cabin. He wanted to know if the deed was in your name or if it was still part of the estate." The cabin. 2 acres of pristine lake property my father had left me when he died 5 years ago. Blake had been there exactly once, complained about the lack of Wi-Fi the entire weekend, and swore never to return. "What did you tell him?" "Nothing specific, but he was insistent. Said he was helping you organize family assets for tax purposes." She paused and I could hear her uncertainty. "Since when does Blake care about taxes? Last Christmas he didn't even know what a W-2 was." "Mom, did he ask about anything else?" "Your grandmother's jewelry. Whether it was formally appraised. Whether there was documentation." Her voice hardened. "Cassidy, that boy has attended exactly 1 family gathering in 4 years. Now he's calling me about property deeds and appraisals." Blake had been at his brother's bachelor party during Dad's funeral. He'd missed my grandmother's 90th birthday because of a networking retreat that turned out to be a golf weekend. He'd never shown interest in my family beyond asking if there were trust funds he should know about. "Don't tell him anything else, Mom. If he calls again, refer him to me." "Already done. I told him my memory isn't what it used to be." She chuckled darkly. "My memory is fine. I remember exactly what I think of men who plan their attacks while pretending to love you." After Mom hung up, I made my own call. Rachel Thornton answered on the second ring, her voice crisp and professional even though I was calling her personal line. "Cassidy. I wondered when you'd call. You were expecting this?" "I've been expecting it since Blake showed up at the Harrington Charity Gala last month, chatting up divorce attorneys during the cocktail hour. Word travels in legal circles." I thought back to that night. Blake had disappeared for an hour, claiming he was networking. I'd been too focused on securing a donation for the women's shelter to pay attention to his whereabouts. Rachel's fingers flew across her keyboard as she spoke. "Let me pull up your files. The CBW Holdings Trust, established 2 years before your marriage. The house titled exclusively to the trust. Your business incorporated as a separate entity with you as sole proprietor. Your premarital assets, all documented and never commingled with marital funds. So I'm protected? Better than protected. You're bulletproof, legally speaking." She paused and I could hear her smile through the phone. "Blake can hire every attorney from here to Manhattan. The documentation is airtight." "Then why does this feel like I'm losing something?" Rachel's voice softened slightly. "Because you are. You're losing the illusion of who you thought you married. That's often harder than losing money. What do you recommend?" "Let him play his hand. Document everything. Every conversation, every financial transaction, every meeting with his bargain basement attorney." Her tone sharpened again, back to business. "Men like Blake always overplay when they think they're winning. Their ego becomes evidence." I thought about Blake sitting in my office chair this morning, arranging my papers like props in his performance. The new briefcase, the practiced posture, the rehearsed phrases. He wasn't just planning a divorce. He was staging a takeover. "Rachel, he's planning something for tonight. A dinner where we discuss our future. Then give him the performance he expects. Let him think you're unsuspecting. The more confident he feels, the more mistakes he'll make." She paused. "And Cassidy? Record everything. Missouri is a one-party consent state. Your phone in your pocket is perfectly legal." I hung up feeling steadier but somehow sadder. This morning Blake had been my disappointing husband. This afternoon he was my opponent. By tonight he would reveal himself as something worse. A man who'd spent years sleeping beside me while planning his betrayal, practicing his lines in the mirror, convinced he could take everything I'd built because he'd watched me build it. I arrived home at exactly 7 o'clock, my phone recording in my jacket pocket, the weight of it a small comfort against what was coming. The house smelled wrong, like soy sauce and something synthetic. Blake had ordered Chinese food but not from our usual place. This came from the cheap restaurant near the highway, the one we'd tried once and sworn never to return to after finding a hair in the rice. He'd set the dining room table with my grandmother's Wedgwood china, the delicate blue and white plates she'd brought from England in 1952. We'd used them exactly twice in 4 years. Our first anniversary and the night my biggest client signed a 5-year contract extension. Blake had complained both times about hand-washing them, said it was pretentious to own dishes you couldn't put in the dishwasher. Now he moved around my kitchen with unfamiliar purpose, plating orange chicken and beef broccoli onto porcelain that had survived 2 world wars and 3 generations, only to be used as props in Blake's performance. He'd even lit candles, the expensive ones I saved for power outages, and dimmed the lights to what he probably thought was atmospheric but actually made the room feel like a funeral parlor. "Sit," he said, gesturing to my usual chair while he remained standing, a manila folder tucked under his arm. He'd changed into a different suit, this one navy, also purchased with my credit card during last year's failed job search. "We need to have an honest conversation about our marriage." I sat, noting how he'd positioned himself between me and the door, probably something his bargain attorney had suggested. Establish dominance. Control the exit. Make her feel trapped. What neither Blake nor his busbench lawyer understood was that I'd negotiated with corporate executives who ate intimidation tactics for breakfast. Blake cleared his throat and launched into what was obviously a prepared speech. "Cassidy, we've grown apart. Our life paths have diverged in ways neither of us anticipated when we set our vows." He paused dramatically, the way he'd seen actors do in movies. "I've been doing a lot of soul-searching, attending therapy, working on myself." Therapy. That was new. Unless he counted YouTube motivational videos as professional help, Blake had never set foot in a therapist's office. He continued, his voice taking on the smooth cadence of a bad TED Talk. "I've realized that our marriage has become unbalanced. You're consumed by your work and I've been left to manage everything else alone. The emotional labor, the household management, the sacrifice of my own dreams to support yours." I reached for my water glass, letting him continue his monologue while I studied his face. He'd practiced this in front of a mirror probably multiple times. His gestures were too coordinated, his pauses too calculated. Even the way he'd placed his hands on the back of his chair was staged. "I think it's best if we separate," he continued, finally sliding the manila folder across the table, pushing aside a container of sweet and sour sauce. "I've had papers drawn up that I believe are fair to both parties." I opened the folder while Blake watched, his breathing slightly accelerated. The first page was exactly what I'd expected. A joke of a legal document that looked like it had been downloaded from a template website and filled in with creative interpretations of property law. He was demanding the house, citing his contributions to its maintenance and improvement. He wanted alimony based on his career sacrifices. He'd even listed my business as a marital asset, claiming he'd been an unofficial consultant throughout its development. "You want half of Cassidy Blackwood Consulting," I said, not as a question but as confirmation of his delusion. "I've been your sounding board for every major decision," Blake said, his confidence growing. "I've attended networking events, supported your late nights, sacrificed my own entrepreneurial ventures." I flipped to the next page. He wanted my grandmother's jewelry, calling it marital gifts. The Vermont cabin was listed as joint recreational property. Even my car, purchased 6 months before our wedding, was somehow classified as a shared asset. Blake moved closer, standing over me now. "This is what's fair, Cassidy. What we built together should be divided equally." I continued reading in silence, my expression neutral while inside I catalogued every ridiculous claim, every legal impossibility, every piece of evidence that Blake had no understanding of what he'd actually signed this morning in my office. The papers he'd arranged so carefully on my desk had been decoys, documents I'd left accessible knowing his curiosity would overcome his limited attention span. Well, Blake's patience was fraying. Are you going to sign? I set down the papers and looked up at him. You want the house. I deserve the house. I've made it a home while you've treated it like a hotel. And my business? Our business. Built during our marriage. Community property. The cabin in Vermont? Where we've made memories as a couple. Each lie was delivered with increasing confidence, as if repetition could transform fiction into fact. Blake had spent exactly one night at the Vermont cabin, complained the entire time, and left early claiming allergic reactions to pine trees that mysteriously never affected him during Christmas season. I picked up the pen he'd placed beside the papers. A blue Bic, not even a good one, and he stepped back anticipating victory. His phone was already out, probably ready to text his brother or his gym buddies about his successful negotiation. No, I said simply, setting the pen down. Blake's face flushed. What do you mean, no? I mean no. I'm not signing these papers. His practiced composure cracked like cheap paint. You have to sign them. This is what's happening. I've made my decision. Your decision? I stood slowly, matching his height in my heels. Your decision about my house. My business. My inheritance. Blake's hands clenched into fists. Our house. Our business. 4 years of marriage makes everything ours. That's not how property law works, Blake. He slammed his palm on the table hard enough to rattle the china. Don't lecture me about law. My attorney says. Your attorney who advertises on bus benches? Blake's face went from red to purple. He leaned across the table, his voice dropping to what he probably thought was menacing. You're going to sign these papers, Cassidy. You can do it voluntarily or we can do this the hard way. The hard way. I almost smiled. What does that mean exactly? He straightened, pulling himself up to his full height and pointed at the door. Sign the papers or get out. This is my house now. I've established residency. I've contributed to its maintenance. Sign or pack your things and leave. The words hung in the air between us, just as Rachel had predicted. Blake had delivered his ultimatum exactly as his cut-rate attorney had probably coached him, not understanding that he'd just committed several legal errors in less than 30 seconds, all now recorded on my phone. I picked up the pen again and Blake's entire body relaxed, victory written across his features. I signed every page slowly, deliberately, making him watch each signature. My name flowed across the signature lines with the same precision I used for million-dollar contracts, each letter perfectly formed. When I finished, I set the pen down and removed my house keys from my pocket, placing them next to the signed papers with deliberate ceremony. My wedding ring followed. The platinum band I'd purchased myself when Blake claimed rings were outdated symbols of ownership. The irony wasn't lost on me. I stood, collected my purse and walked toward the door without a word. Blake called after me, his voice carrying a mixture of confusion and triumph. That's it? You're just leaving? I paused at the doorway, looking back at him standing there among the takeout containers and stolen china, holding papers he didn't understand, celebrating a victory that existed only in his imagination. I said nothing. There was nothing to say that wouldn't be better delivered through legal channels. 20 minutes later, I was in Rachel's conference room, the one usually reserved for depositions and settlement negotiations. She'd stayed late just as promised and had already prepared everything we needed. Coffee in real cups, not the paper ones Blake always grabbed from gas stations. Legal documents spread across the table in organized sections, each one properly tabbed and labeled. He said it. Rachel asked, pulling up social media on her laptop. Word for word. Sign or get out. He even pointed at the door for emphasis. Rachel's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. Perfect. Now let's review what he's been posting while you were at dinner. Rachel's laptop screen glowed with Blake's latest Instagram post, uploaded just 45 minutes after I'd left the house. The photo showed him raising a beer in my living room, surrounded by his gym crew with the caption, "New chapter starts now. Sometimes you have to remove toxic people to find your peace. Hashtag fresh start, hashtag my house my rules, hashtag leveling up." He's literally broadcasting evidence, Rachel said, taking screenshots with methodical precision. Look at this one. She scrolled to another post where Blake had photographed my home office, now transformed into what looked like a gaming paradise. 3 monitors arranged on my handcrafted desk, LED strips running along the walls I'd painted myself, His collection of action figures displayed where my achievement awards used to sit. The caption read, "Finally turning this workspace into something productive. No more corporate prison vibes." My phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer Martinez, my neighbor 2 houses down. She and I weren't close, but we shared the kind of polite relationship that involved waving during morning runs and accepting packages for each other. Her message was brief: "Blake's having quite the party. Just watched him give a tour to about 10 people. He's telling everyone you abandoned the marriage for your career. Thought you should know." Another text followed immediately, this one with a video attachment. Jennifer had filmed from her kitchen window, catching Blake on the front porch with his brother and several men I recognized from his gym. His voice carried clearly across the quiet street. She chose spreadsheets over family. I gave her an ultimatum and she literally walked out. Just left. Can you believe that? 4 years of supporting her ambition and she couldn't even fight for us. I set my phone down on the hotel suite's marble bathroom counter. The Marriott downtown wasn't cheap, but I needed a base of operations that felt controlled, professional, somewhere I could think without the emotional weight of memories in every corner. The suite had a separate living area with a desk where I'd already set up my laptop, preparing for what would come next. Marcus Chen's name appeared on my phone screen. My CFO rarely called after hours unless something required immediate attention. "The transition is complete," Marcus said without preamble. "All company accounts have been restructured. Blake Wilson's access was terminated at 8:47 p.m. His corporate card was deactivated, and all automatic payments linked to it have been suspended pending reassignment." How many automatic payments? 17. Including his BMW lease, gym membership, country club access, wine storage unit, and something called Executive Presence Coaching, that's been charging $400 monthly for the past year. Executive Presence Coaching. Blake had told me that was career counseling to help him launch his consulting firm. I'd been funding his life coach to tell him he was special while he contributed nothing to our household except dirty dishes and empty promises. Document everything, Marcus. Create a full audit trail. Already in progress. Also, Blake attempted to use the corporate card 20 minutes ago at something called Velocity Sports Bar. The transaction was declined. Of course he'd tried to put his celebration party on my company card. The same card he'd been using for years to fund his lunches with potential business partners, who never materialized into actual ventures. My phone rang again, this time showing my sister Sarah's face. A photo from last Christmas when she'd visited from Seattle. Sarah was 3 years younger but decades wiser when it came to reading people. She'd never liked Blake, though she'd been polite enough to hide it during family gatherings. What kind of manipulative garbage is Blake trying to pull? Sarah's voice was tight with anger. "He just called me, claiming you're having some kind of breakdown, that you walked out on your marriage and need space to process your emotions. He actually suggested I should encourage you to seek therapy for your workaholism. He called you 20 minutes ago. Had the nerve to sound concerned like he was the worried husband. Kept saying you'd chosen your career over family, that he'd tried everything to save the marriage but you were too focused on money to see what really mattered." I moved to the suite's window, looking down at the city lights. Somewhere out there, Blake was celebrating in my house, telling his version of events to anyone who would listen. The villain narrative he'd crafted where I was the cold, calculating businesswoman who'd abandoned a loving husband. "Sarah, he's trying to control the narrative before." "Before what? Cassidy, what's really happening?" Because the Blake who called me sounded coached, like he was reading from a script. He used words Blake doesn't know. He mentioned emotional labor and relationship equity. Since when does Blake know those terms? Since his attorney told him what to say. Sarah's silence lasted several seconds. "He's trying to take the house, isn't he? The house Grandma's money bought. Among other things. That pathetic leech. 4 years of you paying for everything while he played entrepreneur, and now he wants to steal what you built." Her voice rose. "Remember when Dad was in the hospital? Where was Blake?" "Oh right, at a crucial networking retreat that turned out to be a golf weekend. I remember. 3 months Dad was sick and Blake visited once. For 20 minutes. And now he's calling me about family values." She paused, her voice softening. "Do you need me to come get anything from the house? Important documents, Grandma's jewelry, anything he might damage or claim?" "Not yet. Let him think he's won for now. Cassidy, I know you. You're planning something. I'm not planning anything. I'm just documenting reality while Blake creates his own fantasy. After Sarah hung up, I opened my laptop and logged into our banking app. The joint account showed Blake's spending in real time. $127 at Velocity Sports Bar declined. $84 at the liquor store declined. $45 at the pizza place declined. Each rejection was time-stamped, creating a digital trail of Blake's collapsing celebration. A text from Emma appeared. Blake called the office asking about accessing the company portal. Claimed he needed to review partnership documents. Security flagged it as unauthorized access attempt. Partnership documents. Blake, who'd never been a partner in anything except spending my money, was already trying to establish a claim to my business. His attorney must have told him to gather evidence of involvement, not understanding that every login attempt, every call, every text was being logged by people who actually understood documentation. My phone buzzed with another Instagram notification. Blake had posted a photo of my wine cellar, the one I'd had custom built to store my collection of investment-grade vintages. He'd opened one of my 2015 Chateau Margaux bottles, worth about $800, and was pouring it into red Solo cups for his gym buddies. The caption, "Life's too short for saving things for special occasions. Today is the special occasion." Rachel texted immediately. "He's documenting destruction of separate property assets. Keep recording everything." The hotel room's silence felt strange after years of Blake's constant noise. His video games, his conference calls for businesses that never launched, his motivational podcasts played at volumes that suggested he thought success could be absorbed through decibels alone. Here in this temporary space I could think clearly for the first time in months. Another message arrived, this one from the BMW dealership. "Ms. Blackwood, we're attempting to reach Blake Wilson regarding his lease payment. The account on file has been declined. Please contact us at your earliest convenience." Blake's first stumble was beginning. Tomorrow, when he woke up hungover in my house, surrounded by empty bottles and the debris of his premature victory party, the calls would start. The gym wondering about his membership. The country club about his access card. The wine storage facility about his monthly fee. Each small failure would build into an avalanche of reality that no amount of Instagram filters could hide. I closed my laptop and prepared for bed in sheets that didn't smell like Blake's cologne or carry the weight of shared disappointments. Tomorrow would bring new developments, new evidence, new mistakes as Blake continued to celebrate a victory that existed only in his imagination. Morning arrived with a text from Emma that made me sit up straight in the hotel bed. "Can we meet before the office opens? There's something I should have told you months ago." The timestamp showed 5:47 a.m. Emma never messaged before 7 unless something was seriously wrong. We met at a quiet coffee shop 3 blocks from my office, the kind of place where business deals were discussed in whispers and nobody looked up from their laptops. Emma was already there, nervously shredding a napkin into tiny pieces, her usual composure completely absent. 3 months ago, during the Patterson Industries conference, she began without preamble, "I saw Blake at the Marriott downtown. You were giving your keynote presentation, and I'd stepped out to handle that emergency with the Chicago contract." She paused, forcing herself to meet my eyes. He was with someone. A woman. Early 20s, blonde, extremely fit. The coffee shop's jazz music played softly while I processed this information. 3 months ago, Blake had told me he couldn't attend the conference because of a stomach bug. I'd delivered my presentation to 300 industry leaders while my husband was at a hotel 6 blocks away. "I convinced myself it was a client meeting," Emma continued. "Blake was always talking about his business ventures, so I thought maybe he'd finally found an investor or partner." She pulled out her phone, scrolling through Instagram with practiced efficiency. "Then last week I saw this." The screen showed a woman's profile. Jessica Reeves, personal trainer and fitness influencer. In her recent posts, Jessica was wearing my diamond tennis bracelet, the one Blake claimed had been sent for cleaning 2 months ago. Another photo showed her in my Cartier watch, an anniversary gift that had supposedly been lost during our last vacation. My grandmother's pearl necklace adorned her neck in a gym selfie, hashtag blessed and hashtag living my best life. "These are all your pieces, aren't they?" Emma asked quietly. "I recognize them from company events." The pearls had been my grandmother's wedding gift from my grandfather in 1951. Blake had told me they were at the jeweler being restrung. The watch had mysteriously disappeared from our bedroom dresser. The tennis bracelet had supposedly fallen off during one of Blake's golf outings, and he'd filed an insurance claim that I'd never followed up on because I trusted my husband. Rachel called while I was still staring at Jessica's Instagram. My forensic accountant found something interesting. Blake opened a separate account 4 months ago at First National. Different branch from your usual one, using your home address but only his name. How much? $37,000 in deposits over 4 months. Cash deposits structured to avoid reporting requirements. Classic concealment tactics. Papers rustled in the background. The timing corresponds with items disappearing from your inventory. Your grandmother's silver tea service, the signed first edition books from your father's collection, several pieces from your storage unit. My father's books. The complete Hemingway collection he'd built over 40 years, each volume carefully selected and preserved. Blake had said the storage unit had been reorganized for climate control, that everything was safer in new containers I hadn't had time to inspect. He's been liquidating assets for months, Rachel continued. Building an escape fund while you paid for everything. The mortgage, utilities, his car insurance, food, his gym membership. You were funding his lifestyle while he was stealing from you to fund his exit. After ending the call, I drove to my house, not to confront Blake but to speak with Mrs. Chin next door. She answered immediately as if she'd been expecting me. Mrs. Chin was 73, sharp as a legal brief, and had lived next door since before I bought the house. She'd never liked Blake, calling him that loud man, whenever his music disturbed her afternoon tea. I have something to show you, she said, leading me to her dining room where a laptop sat open on her polished mahogany table. My grandson installed these doorbell cameras after those package thefts last year. They record everything. The footage began playing. Date stamp. 2 weeks ago, 2:47 p.m. Blake's BMW pulling into our driveway. Blake getting out, walking around to open the passenger door for Jessica. They were laughing, his hand on her lower back as he guided her to our front door. The casual intimacy of people who'd done this many times before. There's more, Mrs. Chin said, clicking to another file. This is from last month. Jessica arriving alone with her own key. My house key. Walking in like she owned the place while I was at a client meeting in Boston. The timestamp showed she stayed for 3 hours. Another video showed them carrying boxes from the house to Blake's car. My boxes. My belongings. My life being stolen piece by piece while I worked 14-hour days to pay for the roof over their heads. I should have said something sooner, Mrs. Chin apologized. But I wasn't certain it was my place to interfere in marital matters. Back at the hotel, Rachel had assembled more information about Thomas Garrett, Blake's attorney. The research painted a picture of staggering incompetence wrapped in flashy marketing. 2 suspensions from the bar for ethics violations, one for mishandling client funds and another for filing frivolous lawsuits. His website promised aggressive representation for men's rights, and featured testimonials that Rachel's investigator discovered were fabricated. He advertises on Facebook and Craigslist, Rachel said, barely concealing her professional disdain. His success rate is 12%. Most of his cases settle unfavorably or get dismissed. Blake found him through a sponsored post that promised David versus Goliath legal victories. The irony was perfect. Blake, convinced of his own brilliance, had hired an attorney whose incompetence was documented in public records. He'd chosen flash over substance, marketing over merit, the same way he'd approached everything in our marriage. Marcus Chin sent another update about Blake's financial situation. The executive presence coaching had been cancelled for non-payment. His wine storage unit was sending default notices. The country club had suspended his membership pending payment of outstanding dues. Each domino falling exactly as predicted, Blake's carefully constructed image crumbling one declined transaction at a time. Jessica had posted another photo that evening, wearing my grandmother's emerald ring at a restaurant I recognized as the place Blake had proposed to me 4 years ago. The caption read, "When you know you know. #new beginnings, #upgrade, #word hit. Great. As if my life, my success, my grandmother's jewelry were just temporary placeholders until Blake could trade up to a younger model. The investigation was revealing more than just financial fraud and adultery. It was exposing the systematic planning of a man who'd viewed our marriage as a business opportunity from day one, staying just long enough to position himself for what he thought would be a profitable exit. Rachel and I arrived at her office at 8 in the morning, earlier than usual, because she wanted to review the trust documentation one more time before the inevitable phone calls started. The morning sun streamed through her corner office windows, illuminating the neat stacks of papers that represented 4 years of my marriage reduced to asset lists and legal precedents. At exactly 8:47 a.m., my phone lit up with notifications from the BMW dealership's automated system. Blake's car had been repossessed from my driveway 30 minutes earlier. The tow truck driver had left a notice on the front door explaining that the lessee should contact the Financial Services Department immediately. Blake, who rarely woke before 11, would discover this in a few hours when he stumbled outside expecting to find his precious status symbol waiting in the garage. Emma forwarded me an email that had bounced back from Blake's company email address, the one I'd set up for him 2 years ago when he insisted he needed it for his consulting business that never materialized. The address was dead, the account terminated as of midnight. His phone would be next, once he realized the device in his hand was suddenly just an expensive paperweight without cellular service. At 9:15 a.m., Jennifer Martinez texted me a photo from her living room window. Blake stood in my driveway in his pajamas, staring at the empty space where his BMW should have been, holding the repossession notice like it was written in a foreign language. Even from a distance I could see his confusion morphing into panic as he tried to call someone, anyone, only to discover his phone had no service. Rachel's paralegal knocked and entered, carrying a fresh cup of coffee and wearing an expression of barely suppressed amusement. Mr. Wilson just tried to use the Keurig machine at the house. The Smart Plug app shows 5 failed attempts to activate it remotely. He also tried the television, the sound system and the automated blinds. Everything's been disconnected from his access. The smart home system I'd installed last year, all connected to my account, all controlled by my phone. Blake had mocked it as unnecessary technology, but he'd certainly enjoyed using voice commands to adjust the temperature and lighting. Now he was trapped in a house that no longer recognized him as an authorized user. At 9:42 a.m., Jessica Reeves updated her Instagram story. She was at brunch with someone new, a man whose Rolex was visible in the frame as he poured champagne. The caption read, "When the universe removes toxic people automatically. #blessed, #trading up, #new energy." Blake had been tagged in the post initially, but the tag was removed within minutes. She'd already moved on to her next target. Marcus Chun called with an update on Blake's attempted transactions from the morning. He tried to buy coffee at his usual place. Declined. Attempted to get gas at 3 different stations. All declined. He even tried to use Apple Pay linked to the corporate account. That was terminated at midnight. Marcus paused and I could hear him typing. He's currently at an ATM trying to access the joint account. That's showing a balance of 0 as of this morning's transfer. Blake's entire financial ecosystem had collapsed overnight. Every card, every account, every automatic payment that had sustained his lifestyle for 4 years had been systematically terminated. The man who'd spent the previous evening celebrating his victory was discovering that his empire had been built on someone else's foundation. At 10:03 a.m., Thomas Garrett's name appeared on Rachel's phone screen. She put him on speaker and we could immediately hear the panic in his voice before he even spoke. Papers rustled frantically in the background, and someone was typing rapidly on a keyboard. "Miss Thornton, I need clarification on some documentation that's just come to my attention," Garrett began, his voice notably higher than during yesterday's confident threats. "The CBW Holdings Trust you mentioned. My client was under the impression that the property was marital asset. Your client signed documents acknowledging the property was owned by the trust," Rachel responded, her tone professionally neutral while her eyes sparkled with satisfaction. "His signature appears on 7 different pages affirming his understanding of the ownership structure. But he didn't. I mean, there may have been some confusion about the implications of those signatures." Confusion? Rachel pulled up the documents on her screen. Mr. Wilson signed a separation agreement demanding sole and exclusive rights to property he knew was owned by my client's trust. "That's documentary fraud, Mr. Garrett. I'm sure someone who advertises expertise in property division would recognize the severity of that. The typing in the background stopped. We could hear Garrett's breathing accelerate as he processed the implications. More papers shuffled, and then a muffled conversation as Garrett apparently covered the phone to speak with someone else in his office. "I need to review this with my client," Garrett said when he returned, his voice strained. "There seems to be a misunderstanding about the nature of the property ownership." "There's no misunderstanding," Rachel said calmly. "Your client attempted to claim property he never owned, using documents he created while planning to commercially exploit that property through short-term rentals. We have his social media posts, his rental listings, and his signed acknowledgement that he understood the trust structure. Would you like me to forward you the evidence file?" Another pause, longer this time. Then Garrett's voice, barely controlled, speaking to someone in his office but clearly audible through the phone. "Get Blake Wilson on the phone immediately." We heard the speakerphone click on in Garrett's office, and then Blake's voice, panicked and angry. "Tom, what's happening? My car is gone, my cards don't work, I can't even make coffee in my own house." "It's not your house," Garrett said flatly. "It never was your house. What are you talking about? I have the separation agreement. She signed it. She gave me the house." Garrett's composure finally cracked completely. His voice rose to nearly a shout, forgetting that Rachel and I were still on the line. "Do you have any idea what you just let her do? You signed documents claiming ownership of property held in a trust. A trust established before your marriage. You committed fraud, Blake. Documentary fraud. She didn't give you anything. You gave her evidence to bury you with." The silence that followed was absolute. We could hear Blake breathing on the speaker, rapid and shallow, as the reality finally penetrated his delusions. Rachel muted our end of the call, and we listened as Garrett continued his explanation, his voice becoming increasingly agitated as he outlined the catastrophic legal position Blake had created for himself. "The property was never marital asset. Your social media posts constitute evidence of intent to commit fraud. The separation agreement you had her sign is worthless because you can't transfer ownership of something you never owned. And by claiming exclusive rights to the property, you've admitted in writing that you understood the ownership structure while attempting to steal it anyway." Blake's response was barely audible, all his manufactured confidence evaporated. "But you said possession was 9/10 of the law. You said if I established residency." "I said that before I knew about the trust. Before I knew you'd been posting about turning it into a rental property. Before I knew you'd signed documents acknowledging you understood the ownership structure." Garrett was clearly in full panic mode now. "You need to vacate that property immediately. Today. Before she files criminal charges." Rachel unmuted our phone. "Mr. Garrett, we're prepared to give your client 72 hours to vacate, provided he doesn't damage any property or remove any items that don't belong to him. After that, we'll proceed with formal eviction and criminal fraud charges." Garrett's panicked voice was still echoing through Rachel's office when we heard Blake in the background shouting something about squatters' rights and residential tenancy laws. The call ended abruptly with Garrett saying he needed to review case precedents immediately. Rachel closed her laptop with satisfaction and looked at me across her mahogany desk. "The eviction notice will be served tomorrow morning at 7, she said, pulling up the sheriff's department portal on her screen. "Deputy Martinez has already been briefed on the situation. He's handled dozens of these cases where someone claims ownership without legal standing." The next morning, I watched from my hotel room window as the sun painted downtown in shades of gold and amber. At precisely 7 a.m., my phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer Martinez, my observant neighbor. She had attached a video of Deputy Martinez walking up my driveway in his crisp uniform, carrying official documents that would formally begin Blake's removal from my property. 20 minutes later, my phone rang. Blake's number appeared on the screen, calling from a landline since his cell service had been terminated. I answered on the third ring, keeping my voice neutral and professional. "Cassidy, we need to talk about this situation," Blake began, his voice lacking its usual manufactured confidence. "This has all gotten out of hand. Maybe we should sit down and discuss this like adults." "We did discuss it, Blake. You presented me with separation papers demanding my house, my business, and my inherited assets. I signed exactly what you asked me to sign. That was just negotiation tactics. You know how lawyers are. They always start high." His voice cracked slightly, the desperation beginning to seep through. We could work this out ourselves. Maybe try counseling? Remember how good things were in the beginning. The beginning. When Blake had presented himself as an ambitious entrepreneur temporarily between ventures. Someone who just needed the right partner to achieve his potential. I had mistaken his confidence for competence, his dreams for plans, his promises for potential. Blake, the CBW Holdings Trust was established 2 years before we met. Every mortgage payment came from my business account. You signed documents acknowledging you understood the ownership structure. There's nothing to work out. His tone shifted from conciliatory to aggressive within seconds. You set me up. You knew what you were doing all along. This whole marriage was just a business arrangement to you. The marriage was real, Blake. Your contribution to it wasn't. For years, and you never paid a single household bill, never contributed to the mortgage, never even bought groceries unless it was with my credit card. I supported you emotionally. I maintained our home. I sacrificed my career. His voice rose to nearly shouting, the same rehearsed lines his attorney had probably fed him. You played video games while I worked 14-hour days. You went to the gym while I negotiated million-dollar contracts. You had affairs while I was at conferences earning the money you were spending. I kept my voice steady, factual, without emotional inflection. You didn't sacrifice anything because you never had anything to sacrifice. The silence stretched for several seconds before Blake's voice returned, smaller now, almost pleading. Where am I supposed to go? I don't have any money. My car's been repossessed. You've destroyed my life. Your brother is coming with a moving truck this afternoon. You have 72 hours to remove your personal belongings. Anything you actually own, not anything purchased with my money or claimed as mine. Blake's brother Daniel arrived at 2 p.m. with a U-Haul truck that looked too large for what Blake actually owned. I watched through Mrs. Chen's security camera feed as Daniel helped Blake carry out his possessions. The gaming chair he'd bought with last year's consulting bonus, that was actually my quarterly dividend. The exercise equipment purchased during his fitness influencer phase, funded by my annual bonus. The vision boards he'd created during his life coach certification, a program I'd paid for that he'd never completed. Jennifer Martinez sent me updates throughout the afternoon. They're arguing about the television, she texted. Blake insists it's his. Daniel just showed him the receipt on your credit card statement. Another text 20 minutes later showed Blake standing in the driveway, gesturing wildly at neighbors who were pretending to check their mail or water already drenched gardens. Mrs. Chen had positioned herself on her porch with a cup of tea, watching the proceedings with undisguised interest. Mr. Patterson walked his beagle past the house 3 times, each loop slightly slower than the last. Blake tried to take the Peloton bike, arguing he was the only one who used it. Daniel had to physically stop him, pointing out that the credit card statement showed it was purchased with my company card. The wine refrigerator became another point of contention until Daniel pulled up the purchase history on his phone, proving it predated Blake's arrival in my life. By 4 p.m., the truck contained a pathetically small collection of items. Blake's clothes, most of which I'd purchased but wasn't interested in fighting about. His collection of self-help books and business guides, none of which had ever translated into actual business activity. The plaques and certificates from his various online courses and certifications, monuments to potential that never materialized into productivity. Rachel called as they were loading the last boxes. I have the forensic accounting report complete. Do you want to know the total? Tell me. Over 4 years, Blake Wilson contributed exactly $0 to household expenses. He spent $342,768 of your money on what he categorized as business development, networking, and professional advancement. She paused and I could hear her flipping through pages. This includes $47,000 in gym and fitness-related expenses, $83,000 in restaurant bills for meetings with potential partners who never materialized, $31,000 in online courses and certifications he never completed, and $45,000 in travel for conferences where he was supposedly building his network. And the rest. Personal shopping, entertainment, and cash withdrawals that coincide with the dates he was seeing Jessica. Every penny documented, every transaction tracked. If he tries to claim any financial interest in your assets, this report will demonstrate he was essentially a dependent who contributed nothing while depleting marital resources. I thought about all those evenings I'd come home exhausted from client meetings to find Blake on the couch, planning his next big venture while I paid for his dreams and delusions. $342,000 over 4 years. That money could have funded a scholarship program, supported a women's shelter, or helped actually struggling entrepreneurs launch real businesses. Daniel knocked on several more doors as the afternoon wore on, apparently looking for boxes or tape or bubble wrap. Blake stood by the truck, his shoulders slumped, watching his life get packed into a space smaller than my walk-in closet. The man who'd tried to steal my house was being evicted with barely enough possessions to fill a studio apartment. His empire revealed to be nothing more than borrowed luxuries and stolen dreams. The U-Haul truck disappeared around the corner at 5:47 p.m., carrying Blake's meager possessions and oversized delusions. I stood in Mrs. Chen's driveway for another moment, watching the empty street where my marriage had just been packed away in boxes smaller than my quarterly tax payments. Then I walked back to my house with the locksmith I'd scheduled for 6 o'clock sharp. Robert from Secure Home Systems had serviced the property before, installing the smart locks 2 years ago that Blake never learned to program properly. He worked methodically, replacing every lock, reprogramming every code, his professional silence a comfort after days of legal battles and emotional confrontations. The front door's new deadbolt clicked into place with a sound that felt like punctuation at the end of a very long sentence. "All set, Miss Blackwood," Robert said, handing me a set of keys that gleamed under the porch light. "The smart home system has been completely reset. Only your biometrics and phone will have access now." I entered my house, truly my house, for the first time in days. The space felt different immediately, like it had been holding its breath for 4 years and could finally exhale. Blake had always kept the curtains drawn, claiming the sunlight gave him headaches when really he just preferred the cave-like atmosphere for his gaming marathons. I moved through each room, pulling open curtains, raising blinds, letting the evening light flood spaces that had been shrouded in his manufactured darkness. The living room windows revealed the garden I'd planted but barely enjoyed, always too tired from work, while Blake complained the outdoor furniture wasn't comfortable enough for his afternoon naps. The kitchen seemed larger somehow without his protein powder containers cluttering every surface, his collection of energy drinks that left rings on my grandmother's wooden table. I opened windows that had been sealed shut since winter, letting fresh air replace the stale mixture of his cologne and whatever supplements he'd been taking for his latest fitness transformation. ServiceMaster arrived the next morning with a deep cleaning crew. Not because the house was dirty in any conventional sense, but because I needed every trace of Blake's presence professionally erased. They worked through each room with industrial-grade equipment, steam cleaning carpets where he'd spilled his sports drinks, sanitizing bathrooms where he'd left his expensive skincare products that never made him look any younger, just more desperate. "We'll need to pay special attention to the master bedroom," I told the crew leader, a middle-aged woman named Patricia who understood without further explanation. She'd probably seen enough divorce cleanings to recognize the particular kind of sanitation that had nothing to do with germs and everything to do with reclaiming space from someone who'd contaminated it with betrayal. While they worked, I drove to the storage unit where I'd been keeping my father's books and my grandmother's china that Blake had deemed too cluttered for our minimalist aesthetic. His term for empty spaces he was too lazy to decorate. Box by box, I brought back the pieces of my life I'd hidden to make room for his ego. The complete works of Maya Angelou that Blake called depressing. The Victorian secretary desk my grandmother had written her letters on, which Blake said ruined the modern flow of the living room. My office transformation took 3 days. Where Blake's vision boards had covered the walls. Dreams of businesses that never launched, goals that never materialized, motivational quotes that never motivated action. I rehung my achievement awards. The Partner of the Year plaque from Morrison Industries. The Excellence in Innovation certificate from the State Business Council. The framed first dollar from Cassidy Blackwood Consulting, earned not from dreams but from work Blake never understood. His garage gym equipment had already been removed, leaving a vast empty space that echoed with possibility. Within a week, contractors had transformed it into the library I'd always wanted. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with the collection Blake had mocked as pretentious, leather-bound editions he'd called wasteful, first editions he'd tried to sell behind my back. A reading chair positioned perfectly to catch the morning light. The room smelled like wood polish and old paper, not rubber mats and his perpetual gym sock stench. Sarah flew in from Seattle to help with the final touches, bringing a bottle of champagne she'd been saving since our father's death. "For when you finally came to your senses," she said, popping the cork in my newly reclaimed kitchen. We drank from my grandmother's crystal glasses, the ones Blake had wanted to sell because nobody uses crystal anymore. The truth about Blake's evictions spread through professional networks without my saying a word. Emma mentioned that Patterson Industries had been asking about the sudden change in my emergency contact information. Jennifer Martinez's husband worked at the same golf club where Blake had spent countless afternoons networking, and word traveled quickly about his membership revocation. Even the owner of Blake's favorite restaurant reached out, carefully asking if the corporate account was still active for client dinners. It was just without Blake's authorization. Jessica Reeves posted a cryptic Instagram story about learning to spot red flags, and when someone can't even pay for coffee, run. She'd blocked Blake publicly, making sure mutual connections saw her dismissal of him. His carefully cultivated image as a successful entrepreneur crumbled faster than his legal case. LinkedIn showed he'd viewed my profile 17 times in 1 week, but his own profile disappeared after his post about new chapters and fresh opportunities got screenshotted and shared in private group chats with crying laughing emojis. 6 months later, on a warm September evening, I hosted my first dinner party since reclaiming my house. Rachel arrived early with her wife, bringing wine that cost more than Blake's monthly gym membership. Emma came with her husband, carrying a homemade lasagna in the dish Blake had banned from our kitchen because carbs didn't align with his fitness goals. Mrs. Chun brought her famous dumplings, the ones Blake had called too ethnic for his palate. We gathered around my dining room table, the one Blake had wanted to replace with something more modern, less meaningful. Candlelight reflected off my grandmother's china, the plates he'd used as props for his final performance now serving their actual purpose, bringing people together. The conversation flowed naturally, punctuated by genuine laughter, not the forced networking chuckles Blake had practiced in the mirror. Rachel raised her glass as we finished dessert, a chocolate soufflé I'd made myself in my reclaimed kitchen. "To Cassidy," she said, "who proved that the best revenge isn't destroying someone who wronged you. It's simply protecting what was always yours and letting them destroy themselves." The toast echoed through my house, my actual house, where every room now held my choices, my memories, my future. Blake had wanted to steal it all with paper weapons and practice speeches. Instead, he'd learned what happens when performance meets preparation, when pretense collides with patience, when someone who thinks they're taking everything discovers they never had anything to take. If this story of calculated revenge had you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button right now. My favorite part was when Blake's attorney screamed, "Do you have any idea what you just let her do?" after realizing his client had signed away everything for a house he never owned. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more thrilling stories like this. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload.